Hello, world, and welcome to the Talking Tech podcast here at CEWIT. My name is Chris Lange. I'm your host today. I'm the engineering manager here at CEWIT, and I'm joined by Lloyd from IBM Research. So hello, Lloyd. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Good. So I would love to start the podcast off with just a little bit of introduction to you and your role at IBM.
Yeah. So my name is Lloyd Treinish. I'm an atmospheric scientist at the IBM Thomas J. Watson Research Center. So that's in Yorktown Heights, northern Westchester. Well, depending on traffic, it's anywhere from a 2 to 4 hour drive from here. I do work in sort of applied science to various problems in climate and sustainability. So this is looking at everything from trying to do better predictions of extreme weather to evaluating adaptation strategies and more. I've been at IBM Research for over 30 years. I was at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center for over a decade before that. So working on, climate and sustainability topics has been, that has been my academic and my work life for decades.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very grateful to have you here at the conference. I know you did just have a talk, so we appreciate that. So one thing that I really like to talk about is the theme of today's conference here at CEWIT 2023 is, building a safer, more sustainable future. And I was really just wondering, so from your perspective, what does it look like when we say, we're going to be building a healthier, safer, more sustainable future? What's that vision kind of?
Well,
like to
to me, my perspective is, is coming from, the need to, understand science. What is the current current climate state? What could it be in the future? And that's from that solid science, then we can think about, well, what are the choices that can lead to more sustainable, more healthy future or not? What are the impacts of choices that have already been made, choices that we have the opportunity to make now, and what will be, for the future, of a sustainable world. But really focusing on the solid science in order to inform decision makers to determine, what are the best strategies moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a key point to distill that, the data and the science and the hard facts that are kind of underlying all of these, different technologies and approaches that people are taking to building that type of future. So if you were going to, give advice to a student or someone who's reskilling, upskilling, or changing their career to get involved in building that bigger, beautiful future, what kind of, roles or what kind of techniques, perspectives do you think that they should have if you're going to give that advice?
Yeah, so that's a really important perspective, because when we look at the, at the complexity of the challenges, that's inherently multidisciplinary. So even if you just started with, the physical sciences, that's already complex on its own, multiple disciplines. But now, we have to think about, everything from, the choices that governments or utilities or others make in terms of, the built infrastructure, the places we live, and then individuals themselves. So, then the disciplines expand. So now we introduce, civil engineering, we introduce healthcare, just to name two that have to be sort of coupled together with that. So what that I think for as advice for people interested in having a contribution in these important problems is think about this through a multidisciplinary lens. So if, let's say, I'll start with some bias. Let's say as an atmospheric scientist, what I would encourage people to do is to understand the enabling technology. So in my discipline and in related ones, the technology is key. Computing, analysis, which includes, let's say, AI methods and visualization methods, or techniques to observe, the environment. So if you're focusing on the science, you have to understand what the technology does and how to leverage it, but also its limitations. Similarly, if, let's say, your interest is on the technology side, if let's say it's going to be software engineering, or you want to build things, you're a mechanical or civil engineer, then understanding what are the sort of environmental impacts. You build something physical that's outside,
right.
it has to interact with the environment, with the atmosphere, with the land, and the water, depending on what it is. So understanding those impacts and feedback. So it's whatever the choice of one's field, take the opportunity to become familiar with these other areas that could be impacted by your work, or can take advantage of your work. And then it works the other way around for, say a physical scientist to understand the technology so that they can use it effectively.
Yeah, I think that's, a really great takeaway from there is just that there are so many disciplines and there are so many different ways that people can get involved, whether it's civil engineering, whether it's mechanical engineering, or coming from a computer science background. There's many different approaches that we can all work together. And it's really that combination of all of our different strengths that lets us propel technology forward and start to build that better future, more sustainable future.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And then in some of our projects, we've had the opportunity, to work on the social science side. So it's one thing to have, all right, we have, this kind of feedback between technology and science, and that marches forward. Now, when we want to think about, well, how can this be useful, for individuals, or governments or businesses, connecting to the social side is then critical. So we need to incorporate the social scientists, into that, and then information has to be, trusted by people that will make decisions.
Right.
So one thing that we hadn't necessarily discussed is that whatever data that we collect or we produced is never perfect. So understanding the uncertainties and is important in sort of explaining what models may say or what observations may say. But now, if we're engaging, citizens and stakeholders that'll be impacted, well, they need to understand, the limitations in the information so they can make informed, choices and evaluate trade-offs.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, having that explainability to say, here's the data that we've collected. This is how we have collected it, and this is our understanding of the limitations. I think is what you're, saying is so important for us to make sure that for every data set we have collected and how we explain how we got to where we are and the current understanding that we have.
Yeah, no, agreed. With all the publicity around large language models, in the public today, there's often a corollary, discussion about explainability, and that's critical. But guess what? That applies to any kind of model. So there's this, kind of old running joke that all models are wrong. Some may be useful. Okay, and so that applies whether it's a statistical model, a numerical model based on physics and math, or an AI model, let's say based on generative large language model techniques. So this is sort of a key aspect for being able to use any of these type of data with confidence.
No, definitely. And you had mentioned it. So I think that one question that is in the collective consciousness of the world right now is large language models. And, this may be under the umbrella of, people have heard of things like ChatGPT. So taking a look at, AI, machine learning, and these type of technologies, how would you say this has impacted maybe your work, or if this is something that you think is how we're going to take those technologies moving into the future?
Yeah, so that's as you said, this is now a question on the front of many people's mind because that we see this discussed in social media and the popular press, et cetera. For some of us, that like myself, well, we've been using AI for decades, and so in the environmental sciences, particularly let's say meteorology, half a century. Okay, wow. So the differences today, are and it's actually similar to why we see advances in, let's say, in meteorology. Why are weather forecasts better today? Never perfect, but better today than 10 years ago, 30 years ago, et cetera. Right. It's improved science, improved data coming from technology that can observe, and improved computing. Well, you can apply that same notion to AI. So if we look at, some AI methods that my first exposure to it was in the mid 1980s when I was at NASA. And by today's standards, the amount of data that we used, the amount of computing that we had,
Right.
was about as good as a 5-year-old phone. Okay.
It's interesting to put everything into
Yeah.
perspective.
So there were limits on what methods were practical and verifiable. So now moving forward, I would say it's less a revolution, but more an evolution, but hitting kind of a tipping point or a threshold where there's enough computing being applied to enough data where the models are able to do much more interesting and valuable things. Okay. Yeah. So in my focus, it's more, well, how can these methods be used to improve the kinds of, let's say, numerical models that are at the heart of, let's say, weather forecasts or climate models.
Right.
And the reality is, because, like I said earlier, sort of most models are wrong. Okay. Yeah. So one approach that we take is, because we understand the data, we understand the models, we know, that numerical models, they have these strengths and these weaknesses. Data driven, particularly, newer, AI models, they have clear strengths and they have clear weaknesses. So the idea is, all right, let's steer away from the weaknesses. Don't apply any of these models kind of brute force out of the box.
Right. And
you bring them together and sort of, and so in this case, a numerical model can be used to drive an AI model. And so then this is more focused, more targeted,
tailoring,
and it's tailored, and you can automate that. Or, we know that a numerical model requires data to drive it for sort of what we call initial and boundary conditions. It's different than the way an AI model would take data. So we could use AI to precondition, to evaluate, improve do quality control before the data gets into a numerical model that could contaminate. And so they work together. Yeah. The AI model could also be used to derive features that the numerical model can't, and that could be much more around the impacts as opposed to sort of the physical phenomenon.
That's actually.
And so again, it's taking the advantages of both. This is what we sort of always done, but now there's this opportunity to really do this at a much greater scale because we have more data and we have the computing that were not feasible.
No, I think that what you had brought up is such a great point, that while this technology may be entering the collective consciousness of many and more people, this is something that has really been going on for, decades at this point, where the processes that we use to either, manipulate or make sure that the data set that is being used with these large language models is one that can be explained and one that we know the boundaries for, and such that we take the lessons and learnings that we've had over these many years, and we are applying these to maybe technologies that are now being propelled forward by the combination of numerical analysis and these large language models. I think that that's very, important for us all to keep in mind, that while the technology may seem new, it's really just building upon, like you said, the evolution of other technologies that we've been using for forecasting for, many different purposes throughout the different years. Right?
Yeah, and now I've only had the opportunity to hear the first few speakers today at the conference, but this connects to some of these themes, where the other speakers this morning, talked about the need for domain expertise. So this is anywhere from evaluating the data that's going into let's say an AI model,
sure,
or what the AI model is producing. How to validate it. So
right.
Do we know that this model is producing something useful, something correct, something that could be relied on? And there were clinical examples of that. And so obviously, the reliability of the analysis is paramount.
Yeah, definitely. And making sure we understand that the output from these needs to be evaluated. We need to take a look at what is being generated, whether that's content from a chat-based prompt, or even, like you said, in medical applications or in forecasting. We can't just take a look at the output and say, this was generated. We assume anything about it, right? We have to kind of validate these different
That's right.
steps.
And so, and it was actually very great to see that coming from, a couple of the examples in healthcare. It's not a discipline I'm familiar with. So, but, take a step back and say, oh, well, they have related problems, in the sense that input data are imperfect. The models are powerful, but imperfect. And having, the domain experts, the people familiar with the collected data or the application are involved in the evaluation of the models. And so, that helps them be, not only explainable, but sort of useful and with confidence.
No, definitely. I think that that's one of the things from my perspective that the CEWIT conference, really brings the energy about that. It is something that while you may be using a technology in your domain, there are so many different domains and different fields that are impacted by these technologies that you get to see all these different disciplines that maybe you wouldn't interact with on a day-to-day basis and how they are using the technology and how, you can take lessons learned in one area of expertise and maybe apply it to your expertise.
Oh, yeah,
right?
no, that's, certainly some of that actually came up after I saw two talks these were both related to healthcare problems, but taking a step back in both cases, they had representation of data as images. And then the images were using AI techniques were used to analyze the images, identify features that would be important in a clinical application. So there's data that I might work with that can be represented as images. Okay, yeah. So that could be images from a sensor. Okay, and that could be some type of imaging system that might be on a drone or an aircraft or spacecraft. Looking at some location and you wanting to understand what's going on environmentally.
Yeah.
Or we can create images as visualizations of numerical models, and we can create images that way, which also could be analyzed. So some of the techniques that they illustrated are a little different that I might use.
Sure.
And so that's intriguing. It's like,
it's exciting to see all these different ways that, hey, we can take some lessons here and just apply it in something that maybe they didn't even think that it would be applicable.
That's right. And in some cases, they're using some core technology that might be generic, but they've sort of focused it in a particular application. And so that's kind of some inspiration.
No, definitely. It is inspiring to see all these different speakers, all the different panelists that we have at the CEWIT conference, and just taking a look at, the evolving fields and how we can all apply these technologies together to build that safer, more sustainable and healthier future. So I did just want to thank you, Lloyd, so much for joining us today here at the CEWIT conference and also here on the podcast. So thank you to our audience for joining us, and we will see you guys all on the next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.